There are so many fishes in the sea that swim around in perfect harmony. There are some sharks, and they are pretty bad, so dolphins come and kick them in the head. So if you are a mammal or a fish,
You're a lovely group. Thank you all for being here. I'm very glad to be here too. Very honored to be here. You look like a marvelous group of people. I'm really delighted to be here. Sometimes I don't know where do I begin. And so let me, before I really start on what I'm going to talk about, let me lay some groundwork, so to speak. I'm very sensitive. I was born in the Netherlands, and the Netherlands is also referred to as Holland. Strangely enough, nobody speaks Hollandish or Netherlandish, we all speak Dutch. The same is as in the United States, where you live in North America and you speak English. So hope you understand how this can happen. The Dutch are known for their waterworks and how to build dikes. And I'm going to lay the groundwork first about what they do, because I want you to imagine that we have the sea, and here's some lowlands, and the sea is going in there. And the Dutch said, well, we need more land. We don't have enough land. So why don't we build a dike around that piece of land? We have some windmills, and we pull out all the water, and when the land is dry, we can put cows there, or maybe build homes there. And that's what they did. So imagine the sea is what are called a polder, and they would have, see these axes there, these are windmills. Here's some imagination, right? So I'm telling you that because I walked those decks endlessly during the winter, and I don't ever forget it. I still walk every night, and every night when I'm walking, I look at the length of that street and I say, aha, there we go again. It was 1940, in May, the Germans attacked the Netherlands, Holland. I think the army lasted a day and a half. The city of Rotterdam was flattened by the Luftwaffe, as it was called, the German Air Force. And the Queen of Holland escaped quickly to England, and her family to Canada, and we were left to take care of what was going on. Well, I was 8 years old. Doesn't seem that long ago. And I'm standing at the corner of the street where I was living, and rows and rows of equipment came by, and looking and standing there and looking at all those machinery and soldiers, and a couple of soldiers waved to me, and involuntarily, sorry, I hope you don't mind, make myself comfortable. Wherever I go, I'll make myself comfortable. And they waved at me, and I involuntarily kind of waved back, and I pulled my hand back because I said, no, I can't wave to the enemy. That's not right. Anyhow, I went back home, and where I lived with my father, my mother, and my sister. My sister was a few years older, so I can talk about it now. She recently passed away, so I can talk that she was older. I wasn't allowed to talk about it before. When she was 75, she held a party, and the invitation said, "That's my 61st birthday." Well, anyhow, not talking too much about my sister. Let me talk about what happened. The Germans came in, and there's a story about the Frenchman that wanted to eat the frog, and he had to cook the frog. So the frog was already in a big pot, and he lit a fire under the pot. And the frog said, "Oh, it's pleasant here in the water, and a little bit warm, but it's all right." And the Frenchman kept on building up the heat, till the heat was so severe that the frog was unable to jump out of the pot. I'm not trying to be funny here, because this is exactly what the Germans, or more or less the Nazis, did when they occupied the country. And I want to separate somehow the Nazis and the Germans. The German people were given a matter of no choice. They had to follow through. It was that bad for many Germans that children were shanghaied, so to speak, to talk about what their parents did. And some children, if they didn't like what the parents did, they even bore false witness about some of the things. And those people went to concentration camps. We were blissfully unaware of in 1940, of concentration camps. And the Germans came in, and they said, "Well, everybody needs an ID." And the ID was referred to as an Ausweis. And the German soldier might be standing, and the courtier might be passing by, and then he would say to you, "Ausweis!" And if you didn't have an Ausweis, they could just arrest you and take you to a jail somewhere and interrogate you and beat the hell out of you, understating my case. And if they didn't like, if they were satisfied, they'll let you go. Otherwise, they might keep you there for a long time. So they started with the Ausweis, the ID. Not long thereafter, it turned out that there was somewhat lack of food, because the Germans were shanghaiing all the food to Germany. And we were left with whatever there was left, sometimes not that much. Well, in order to make sure that everybody was getting food, they gave out distribution stamps. They were literally the size of a stamp, and for that, for stamp for bread, for meat, for butter, for sugar, for flour, you get the idea. So we started getting the pinch of that food was in bad supply. One day, my father got hold of 200 cans of tomato soup and rice. These days, I don't eat any more tomato soup and rice. Yeah, sometimes, I mean, as sad as this story is, you know, I survived, and I can still talk about it. So it's a happy ending for me. And I'm one of the few of the millions that didn't have a happy ending. Anyhow, the atmosphere was getting very tense. I was living in Amsterdam, I didn't tell you that, but that's where I was. And the atmosphere was getting very tense, and we were really getting, I mean, you could cut the fear almost with a knife of what the hell was going to happen next. People would disappear. We had neighbors upstairs, people living on the ground floor. One day, they're gone. We don't know anyone. But we didn't ask them any questions. We just said, okay, what's next? And nobody had guns, for sure. And so nobody could defend themselves and take a gun and say, I'm going to shoot that SOB. But so as things got worse and worse, and the tension was getting worse, and we were getting more and more concerned what the hell was going to happen next. My father, it was the month of September, and my father came into my room where I was playing with some toys. Remember, I was 8 years old. Okay, just move. And he said, okay, he said, put on some extra clothes, extra underwear, extra clothes. You can't take a suitcase because that would look suspicious. And we are going to hide from the Nazis and we go underground. I had really no idea what the heck he was talking about. But I learned over the years not to argue with my dad because he easily would slap me. So whenever he said, do this, do that, yes, Dad. So it was a warm day, unusually warm in Holland, and the temperature there doesn't get that hot. And we were walking for about 45 minutes, and we went to a place where my father had rented a small apartment, maybe about 800 square feet at the most. And we went into this room, and it was a bedroom, and he said, I had not been able to take any of my toys with me, that would have kept me busy for hours. But anyhow, now and then I would ask my dad a question and he would grumble, and I figured, well, you better not ask him any questions at this point in time. Before we left, my father came in with a little metal case, a little safe. And he tried to open it, but my father was a klutz of the highest order. And he couldn't open it, even though the key was there. And I said, give it to me. And I opened the case. He never said thank you when I did something like that. That was not in his style. He said, okay, he said, these are bonds and shares, and they're very valuable. 8 years old, I was impressed. I didn't know what it was. But I said, yes, Dad. He said, well, he said, we're going to hide them in the cellar. And I said, okay. And so we put them in the case, he tested the lock one more time, and I showed him how it works, and he said, all right, let's do it. And we hit the case. I'm going to tell you that because there's a reason for that later on. We hit the case, and with the shares and bonds, and we left it there. Well, 3 or 4 days later, my mother and my sister came to the hiding place, and we were a family together, and we had no radio because, I forgot to tell you a few things. Before we went to the hiding, my father had a retail store. And it was a nice store, about 1,400 square feet, I would think, where he was selling china, crystal, leather goods, handbags, small leather goods, household goods, and he was doing quite well. And this store consisted out of 2 parts, a left part and a right part. And in the middle part, towards the end, there was a cash register, and my father would often proudly stand behind that cash register. In those days, there were no credit cards, no checks, no debit cards. Everything was cash. My father was a show-off. Thank heavens. And at the end of the day, he would take the money out of the cash register and put it in his hip pocket. And he always would have a big bundle of money in his pocket. And then whenever he would make a payment, he would take that bundle out of his pocket and kind of turn around so nobody could see what he had, and then he'd peel off the money that he had to pay. And thank heavens he did. And he was standing behind his cash register. And before that, let me tell you something else that happened. You couldn't have a radio, and my father had a Pontiac car. And I always loved driving with him in the car. They took his car away. He couldn't have a car anymore. We couldn't go to a theater. We couldn't use the tram system, the train, so we couldn't travel. we couldn't go to a park. I mean, everything was no Jews. I'm a Jew. I didn't know what it meant, but okay, I just accepted it. There's nothing I could do about it, right? Anyhow, so I had taken this car. He's standing behind the cash register in the store, and in walks a Dutch person with a soldier with a gun on his back. And he walks in and said, "Okay, Rubens, get the hell out of here, I'm taking over." And my father was summarily kicked out of the store. Luckily, he still had all the money in his pocket. But whatever money was in the cash register, he couldn't access. He couldn't access his bank account. Anyhow, so we are now in the hiding place with my father, my mother, my sister, and we didn't have much to do. We just would watch from time to time the news that we heard. But we did have a radio. And secretly we would tune in to the BBC in London. And we also had Radio Orange, which was in the Dutch language BBC out of London. And we would then plot on a map that my father had tacked against the wall where the Germans were, what they had done. They were all over the place. We were not very happy and didn't know what to do at this point in time. My father had an uncle. I have an uncle. My father had a brother, Uncle Harry. Uncle Harry was married to a Christian lady. And because of that, he was exempt from kind of everything because, well, his wife was Christian. So he didn't have to report or anything. And my grandmother and an uncle and an aunt and a cousin were staying with him. My father and my uncle, they talked about it, and they said, "Is it safe?" And yeah, we tossed it back and forward. Cut a long story short, didn't take long. My grandmother, my aunt, my uncle, my cousin also moved in to the small apartment where we were living. And so we had 8 people in the small area. Would you believe that not once was there one word of discontent between us? We all tried to live and make the best of it. And you have maybe heard about the diary of Anne Frank, where there were all kinds of trials and tribulations. Didn't exist with us, everything was fine and dandy. We just made the best out of it. There came a day, and I think the landlady, that lady, I use that not with much relish, the person that my father was renting from, and she was getting our groceries. We were getting some groceries ourselves. I don't remember some frosty nights that my father and I would go for a walk, and we had discovered a clandestine baker who made wonderful pumpernickel. And from time to time we would leave the apartment and walk over in the darkness. It was dark because the Germans didn't want any lights anywhere. So all the light bulbs had no lights anymore. They were not on because that could be a point of connection for the pilots that were flying from London and bombing Germany. So the roads were very dark, and any cars that were driving around, they had hooded lights. So you didn't see the lights from up there. Anyhow, in the darkness, we would go to that clandestine baker and pick up some pumpernickel bread that I thoroughly enjoyed. I still enjoy it, but I can't eat it because I'm diabetic, so no bread. Now and then never mind. From time to time, the people from the underground would visit us, and we would hang on to every word that they would tell us. and they would bring us the little stamps so we could get groceries and whatever, food. And we would give those stamps to Mrs. Usman, who then would do the shopping for us. Shopping for 8 people is a drag. As they say in New York, it's a schlep. And the Germans would tell people that if you can bring us a Jew, we'll give you the equivalent of 250 bucks. Well, there were 8 people there, and one day Mrs. Usman said, aha, that's easy money. To cut a long story short, the bell rings. Now, we were living on what was actually the 2nd story, and you had to walk up a double flight of stairs. And to open the door, you would pull the rope that connected to a lock on the door, and that would open the door. And Mrs. Usman was living 1 flight higher than we were living. And I'm standing in the little hallway, and I hear the bell ring. Mrs. Usman is running down the stairs, pulls open the door, and up walk 2 guys in raincoats. They looked like Colombo, come to think of it. And they run up the stairs. They, okay, you all go in that room there. We'll take you into the theater. What did it mean? Well, any Jewish people that were picked up were sent to the Jewish theater, which was the holding area from where they would be sent to a concentration camp. And at that point, we knew enough about the whole situation that there were concentration camps and people would go in cattle cars and they would stuff 80 people in a cattle car and they would send them to a concentration camp. We didn't know where the concentration camps were at that time. We only knew there was one camp in the northern part of the Netherlands. Well, we're being herded in the one room. By then, I think I'm 90 years old, and I'm scared. I'm that scared. I'm kind of hiding behind my dad. Hey, hiding. And I'm standing behind my dad, and so what you can imagine is we were allowed to pick up some things that will take with us in small cases. And one by one we would leave the room and gather a few things together that we were going to take with us, toiletries and such. I'm standing behind my dad, and my dad goes over his pocket and he goes like, and it took me a few seconds because I was scared and I didn't know what to do, and then I realized that he wanted me to take that bundle of money. And that wouldn't fit in my pocket because it was a lot of money. So I tucked it into my shirt and kept my hand kind of over it. And, you know, you don't pay much attention to a 9-year-old kid. You know, go on, do that. And you don't pay much attention. So, because all the money was reasonably safe in my shirt, so to speak. Well, finally, we being taken out what you might refer to as a paddy wagon to the Jewish theater, and all the chairs were taken out of the theater, and people had kind of created areas for themselves where they would kind of sleep at night. My sister and I didn't go into the theater. Across from the theater was a holding area especially for the children. So they kept the children and the parents apart, and we were allowed to visit our parents during the daytime for 1 or 2 hours, between 2 and 4 p.m. And we were, if this is where the theater is, can you all see this? Across the street was another place, and we were kept there. I was a little bit shook up, you might say, about all this. I was a pretty sensitive kid. And my sister and I were there. My sister was 5 years older, and she kind of did her own thing, and I did my thing. Well, not long thereafter, my sister was cleaning in the kitchen, doing some cleaning work in the kitchen, doing veggies, she looked, she saw there was a door. She opened the door. The door opened up to the street. And she said, damn, I walked out. My father spoke fluently German. He had lived in Germany as a fellow in his early 20s. I made a living there and spoke the language fluently. He had managed to bribe one of the guards in the theater to help them get away when we were going to be put on transport. But my father was concerned about me and wanted me out of the way. So there comes the day, I'm moving right along, you know, many things that happen, but we just highlighted here. There comes a day when we are going to be put on transport on the evening, so we're being the kids were with the parents. And I'm being herded across the street, and I'm in the theater. My father says, okay, this is what I want you to do. There were glass doors, and he said, okay, you see the tracks of the streetcar? I said, yeah, okay. We're going to pretend that you left your sweater across the street. When you're about halfway, there's a little area here where you can stand, then you're about halfway, you know, you run like hell and disappear in the side streets. And I obeyed, he said, yes, Dad. My father talked to one of the people from the German advisory board. They were working as a liaison between the people there and the Germans. And they were kind of safe for the time being. And not to be put on transport, so they worked for the Germans and for the Jewish people there. And my father said, this gentleman will take you across the street. He said, he left his sweater there. Help him out, please. Oh yeah, said the man. So he takes me by the hand. And I'm halfway across the street. And I take my hand out of his hand and I started running. Yeah, good luck, buddy. A German soldier happens to see that I start running away. He runs after me. I manage to run away. Oh, there's a street here, and I managed to get to that street on the side. He runs after me and says, halt! 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 Funny thing happened to me. Has never happened again after that. But at that point, I know he could shoot me, and I got a little bit scared. And somehow I started, my legs kind of halfway turned to jump because of being scared. And I started sinking through my knees. Before I hit the sidewalk, he grabbed me in the scruff of my neck and took me, luckily me. He doesn't take me back to the theater. He puts me back in the holding area for the children. My father sees all this happen. And he must have thought like you won't believe. His life depended on it. Somehow, my life depended on it. And I'm sitting there in the lobby of the place where I had been staying before, all shook up, I was crying, and after half an hour, one of the people from the advisory board walks over to me and says, come with me. Come with him. He takes me through that door where my sister escapes and says, okay, he said, disappear. Walk slowly and go wherever you want to go. And let me out of that door. So I'm on the street, and I have to find our safe place. We had a very good friend from the underground who had done things for us. Oh yeah, a little thing happened. We had in our hiding place, we had a double hiding place. And my mother had brought that little metal case with shares and bonds with her. And we had placed it in the hiding place. And when those two SOBs came in to supposedly arrest us, one of the things that one of those guys did, he walked straight into the hiding place, he knew where it was, and picked up the case and took care of it, so to speak. I got to tell you that later on, my father managed to get it all back somehow, because it was registered. Okay. So we knew at that point who had betrayed us. Well, moving right along here, I'm walking on the street, and we had to wear the Jewish star on our chest. Done a great job sewing that sucker on. Well, maybe something you don't know, but Amsterdam has more bridges and more canals than Venice. So this 9-year-old little kid is leaning over the railing of one of those bridges, and I managed to get that star off my chest, and I rolled it and threw it in the water. Okay, I felt better because I figured, okay, they're not going to pick me up with thinking that I'm Jewish. And I walked over to our safe place where we would go. In those days, you know, people were so formal. Now you say, hey, how are you? I love you, give a hug, a kiss, and all stuff more. Not in those days. Everything was very formal. I get to the safe place, my sister is there. She looks at me and says, oh, you're here? I said, yeah. Okay. That was that. There was no, I'm so glad you're here, or a hug, or a kiss. No. Okay, now my father and mother have to escape. They had arranged with this German guard that when they would get into the wagon, the truck that would transport them to the central station where we would be loaded into cattle cars, that he would undo the rope that held the canvas on the side. I hope you're following what happened here. Anyhow, my father and mother are led into this truck. My mother runs straight away to the back to check if the rope is undone. The rope is undone. My mother says, let's jump. Immediately, there were no guards on the other side. There were only guards on one side. My mother jumps out of the truck. At the same time, and this is like a scene in a movie, like it was all programmed and pre-planned. At the same time that my mother jumps out of the truck, the streetcar comes along. The conductor sees that my mother jumps out of the truck. My mother jumps into the car, and he takes off immediately. Like it was planned. My father goes and disappears in the darkness in the side street. And we all meet a few hours later at our safe place. No hugs. You're there. Good. Okay. From there on, we went to another. We couldn't stay with the people where we were because he was heavy in the underground and it was just too dangerous. So from there on, we went to another place, and Admiral the right or left, but who cares at this point. He stayed there for about 3 or 4 months, and at one point I got very seriously ill. I don't remember what I had, but I recovered. And another uncle of mine, bless his heart, Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam loved me. On days that we, before the war, we would visit him, and Uncle Sam would take me by the hand and he said, "Want a piece of sausage?" Yes, I want a piece of sausage. And he would take me to his secret larder and he would feed me sausage. I still love sausage. Anyhow, Uncle Sam couldn't drive a car, but he had a chauffeur. The chauffeur comes and picks me up from the place where I'm hiding and said, "Okay, come with me, we can hide at our place." So now I go to a place which is the center of Holland. Let me quickly draw the country.
Amsterdam, The Hague, and a city called Utrecht, the center of Holland. Bad drawing, but just to get an idea. Anyhow, we go from Amsterdam to Utrecht by train about 40 minutes, or 45 minutes, whatever. Anyhow, from there we walk to the place where Uncle Kees and Auntie Diane were living. And to my surprise, I had a cousin by the name of Andre. He was there. Andre was a delightful person. He was about 4 or 5 years older than I am. And the only thing is he had very bad asthma, and every night he had an asthma attack, and I just felt so sorry for him. But we were in that place. Well, the Germans would hold from time to time raids. The raid was referred to as a razzia. And what they would do, they would block off an area and a mouse wouldn't be able to get out. And then they would go from door to door, and if you didn't open the door, they just knocked the door in, and they wanted to see your Ausweis and interrogate and see who was there. And we heard about that this was going to happen, and a raid was about to happen. We didn't have much fun in those days. There was no TV. Radio was limited to 2 channels, controlled by the Germans. You can just imagine what that was like. And Andre, being older than I am, well, you know, the Germans might come in and say, hey, we can use you in an Arbeitslager, in a place where you have to do labor. And we can use you there, even though if they didn't suspect that he was Jewish. So Uncle Kees and Aunt Diane said, well, he can stay a few days at my in-laws, my sister's place. How do we get him out of the house safely? But now, we're talking about 1943. Time moves on, fortunately. And we decided that the best way to get him out of the house was to dress him up as a woman. Oh man. We gave him a hat, high heels, a dress, rouge, earrings, a necklace. We did everything possible, and he still looked as ugly as sin. But we got him out of the house safely. In those days, there were no more tires for the bicycles, and the Dutch are bicycle people. So we had, instead of rubber tires, we had wooden tires. If you can imagine what a bar. And poor Andre sat on the luggage carrier on this bicycle, brought over to the in-laws' place, and he arrived safely as a woman. And I got to tell you, he came back exactly the same way. And then that party was over, and we laughed and laughed and laughed. We had a lot of fun. But these were one of the few things that we laughed. One day, raid. Everything is locked off. But only the street where we were living. And the Germans go into one particular home. And a couple of years ago, I went back to Holland, and I wanted to see that street where I was hiding. I could not believe how skinny that street was. I think the width of the street from that door to about here. I mean, 2 cars couldn't really barely pass. And if I was in a room, I couldn't go in front of the window because the people across the street could see me. So I would always stay away from the windows. And an interesting thing is, people in Holland always keep their curtains open. You can look in everywhere. If you would close your curtain, that would look funny. So I always stayed away from the windows, and that was it. I didn't have much place to go. So we could see that these people were being arrested, and we felt terribly sorry for them. And we were thanking our good luck that it wasn't us. Well, we heard later on there was going to be another raid, but it was too late to get out of the house and go somewhere. So Uncle K said, on the roof, and we were on the top floor. So from the balcony, we went onto on a ladder, and we climbed onto the roof. It was November. The temperature, maybe 40, 43 degrees. Holland is as humid as can be, and the wind is always blowing and it goes down to your marrow. So we're hiding on top of the roof, hiding behind the chimney to stay out of the wind. It is colder than hell. And we sat there for a couple of hours till we got a call from Uncle Case, who said, okay, you can come back, all the Germans are gone, and fortunately none of the Nazis went up on the roof. And we came back again. Kind of half frozen and very cold, but okay, we got back. Somewhat later, Uncle Case was a guard. He had to guard a warehouse. The warehouse had food. We didn't have food. Uncle Case made sure he had some food. But it was very dangerous for him to steal the food. So, and with the lack of food, my father had arranged for me to go to a place in the country with a farmer. And I didn't know anything about it. It is October, the bell rings. There's no phone in those days. We talk late 1943, early 44. And this gentleman was being let in, and he said, yes, I came to pick up Jan. All right, now let me explain to you. During the war, my name was no longer, I was named after two grandparents. And this is actually something that is worth a chuckle. Both my grandfathers were named Solomon in the first name. My parents had no choice, they had a name named Solomon. But to call me Solomon is a very long name, so I was shortly named Solo. I was 19 years old and I immigrated to Australia. And I'm on this French ship from Marseille to Sydney, Australia. And my name is, at that time, Solo. During the war, my name was John, Jan, Juan, whatever you want to call it. Yeah? Right, you get the idea. But my name is Solo on that boat. This Frenchman said, what is your name? And he takes a sip from his coke. And I said, Solo. And I almost sprayed me with the coke. He said, what is your name? I said, I'm almost afraid to repeat it. I said, Solo? He said, do you know what that means? I said, no. What does it mean? In French, quel salaud means, what a dirty son of a bitch. When I arrived in Australia, my name was Stan. Okay, the secret is out. I hated the name. But, okay, so, now I'm Stan. Anyhow, yeah, says Uncle Jos, this gentleman that came in, I came to pick up Jan. And, well, we didn't know anything, there was no contact, but yeah, he seemed okay, and he knew my name, he knew the address, the whole thing, but my father had sent him, and I packed a few belongings that I had, which wasn't much. And he was very kind and friendly, he had a flat hat, flat hat, how do you call it again? A cap. Yeah. And he said, okay, he said, we go for a pretty long walk, he said, and then we go to our farmhouse. I said, okay. Well, we started a walk, I told you about those dikes that we have there. We walked that dike, and we walked, and we walked, and we walked, and I think it took about 4 hours of walking, because there was no transportation. So we walked and walked, and hey, you know, I'm about 12 years old. All I've done is sit in a room, never went anywhere, and couldn't go outside and play. and I'm not what you might call physically in great shape. So walking for hours, from time to time I would say to Uncle Jos, I said, is it much further? And he would kindly say, well, yeah, it's still a little bit further, but hang in there. And finally I got there, and guess who is there? My sister, who says, oh, you're here. I said, yeah. Okay. Well, let me see how's our timing. I got to the farmhouse. They had given away so much of the food that we didn't have much food there either. Once a week, the man that brought the bread in a 3-wheel wagon would come by, and Aunt Betty, that was Uncle Jos's wife, would know what Johan, my buddy there, the son of Uncle Jos, we would put them together. We'd do, and we would go and wait. We would lay in waiting for the bread man. And the bread man came. Well, the bread there was no yeast, so the bread would break apart in his carriage, his cart. And when he came in, the two of us would physically dive into his cart and scrape the crumbs from the bottom and prop them straight into our mouth. So we had a few more crumbs to eat, so to speak. One day we heard about a raid, and they were going to block off the whole dike, because we were living on the dike. And Aunt Debbie said, okay, there was a shed about a mile off the road. Go into the shed and hide there. I was totally unprepared, and I had to kind of get off straight away. Again, it was November, it was colder like hell, and the wind was whistling through the lattice work of the shed, and I did hide there for two or 3 days. And then finally got the call I could come back again. Later on, there was another raid. Now there was no time for me to get out of the house. Aunt Becky said, okay, you go in bed. It's about 9 o'clock in the morning. And she says, go into bed. And she puts a little table next to the bed. There's medication. A German soldier, they were wearing what are called hobnailed boots. You know, boots with metal studs under them. Anyhow, he walks into the room, and I'm pretending I'm asleep. He said, Aunt Becky said, he's drunk, he's ill. Nah. Lass mal schlafen, let him sleep. And he walked out again. Well, meanwhile, you know, you're laying there and you're not feeling the tension what's going on. So, well, eventually, the Germans were pushed back by the Allied forces, and I told you about the pumps that kept the water out of the polders, right? Well, we were living in a polder. The son of a bitches stopped the pumps so that the tanks and the military forces couldn't get further because it was all water. And everything was inundated except the very high spots like the dike and the homes that were at elevated levels. Eventually, it is now getting into May, and the water, they turned on the pumps again. We're getting closer to the end of the war, and the Germans figured that, well, they better be a little bit nice. And we could walk again on the land. Was very sorry. Oh, by the way, I was wearing wooden shoes. When I got there, Uncle Jos said, "Oh, you can't wear shoes. You have to have wooden shoes here." And he didn't have a pair of wooden shoes, so I had a right one and another right one for the left foot. Later on, I got a pair. I was so happy. A number of other things happened, but if you want all the details, I have some books here, and I have them available. Or you can also go to the e-books, they're all available. Every e-book reader on the world has now my book. Anyhow, where was I? Yeah, we get to the end of the war, and we had no food. We were hungry like hell. The Germans had allowed the Swedish cross for planes to come over and drop food. I still think about it, I get tears in my eyes. The planes would come down so low you could almost shake hands with the pilots. And they dropped food and we were in the meadows, and some of the pallets broke, and I found bread, white bread, it tasted like cake, and there was a yellowish powder, turned out was dried eggs that I popped in my mouth, and I was so happy. Well, not long thereafter, I hear screaming and screaming, and somebody's walking, running along the dike. They're gone, the Germans are gone, we're free, we're free. And we went into town and we had fun, and the Allied forces came into town, and it was a time of hilarity and joy and pleasure. The war was over. I go back again to the farmhouse, and there is my father and my mother, and my father says, okay, I'm going back to the store in Amsterdam, I'll see you there. I said, yes, Dad. A couple of days later, I said to Aunt Beppie, he said, well, I better go to Amsterdam. And Aunt Beppie says, how are you going to get there? I said, I'm going to walk. I was now 13 years old, and the war was over, it was May. I was so happy, you have no idea. And I said, well, I'm going to walk. Well, she said, okay, I'll make you a few sandwiches. She had some bread. I packed a few sandwiches, took a few belongings, and the next morning I left early in the morning. I started walking and walking, and I was going nicely, and I eventually get to a major estate. There's a giant gate in front. There's a Canadian soldier in front, a guard, and in my best English, because I've been practicing English with my cousin Andre, I said, good afternoon, how are you? And he looked at me and said, hello, young man, where are you off to? I said, Amsterdam. And which is about 45 miles away. And he said, so how are you going to get there? I said, oh? He said, oh, well, sit down for a moment. I said, that's what I wanted to do, I'm a little bit tired. So I sit down, all of a sudden he jumps up and he stops. In those days they had already the little Volkswagen. And he stops the little Volkswagen, calls me over, he said, these people going to Amsterdam, they'll drop you off. Half an hour later, 45 minutes later, I'm in Amsterdam, I get at my father's store. It is a disaster area. It is a mess, you have no idea. It's smelly, stinky, dark and dingy. I walk in and wow. And I knew where my father most likely would be. It was a little office area, so I walked into the store and said, Dad, I'm here. And my dad comes out of his office, sees me, he says, oh, see those boxes? I said, yeah, start unpacking those. At that point, I knew the war was over. Thank you very much. I think you may have some questions, and if you have questions, I will try and answer them in brief fashion. Any questions? Letting me off easier. No questions.
Okay. All right, well, did you unpack the boxes?
You have no idea how many I did pack also.
Is the store still there?
The property is still there. It is, I was back in Holland, I think in 2009, and they were building a subway, and I almost didn't find the street back. That's how everything was in disarray. I did find the store back, and it was a Sunday, everything was closed, and I forgot what was in the store. It was not the same anymore, of course. It was different. I have really no need or desire to go back to Holland. This was a special trip because I wanted to see one more time the chiller fields. That was all. Thank you. Oh, yes, sir. Lay it on me.
How much longer did you stay in Amsterdam after the end of the war then?
Okay, the war was over in 1945. Because of all the bad memories, I wanted to get away as far as possible. And in 1952, it could be 53, I still don't remember. I think in 1952, I immigrated to Australia, Sydney. And from there, I stayed there for 8 years. Then I went to the United States, where I was for 2 years. My mother talked me into coming back. I went back to Holland for 5 years, and 5 years later, in 1966, I moved permanently to Los Angeles. From Los Angeles, I lived there for a long time. And then I didn't tell you about my sailing escapades, because that's another part of the book, why I wanted to sail. And to test myself, I sailed from Newport Beach, California to Honolulu as my escape module, you might say. And I lived in Honolulu till 2006. In 2006, I moved to Los Angeles. I'm here. Thank you all very much.
Stan Rubens, huh? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm one of the lucky ones, let me tell you that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. The green light is on. Mr. Rubin has some books over here. If you'd like to talk to him about it, I'm sure he'd be happy to take care of that.
My publisher went bankrupt, so now I am my own public relations officer and publisher. So the books were $15 and I sell them for $10. And there's also a spoken book, which is also $10.
Well, thank you. Are there any other questions for Mr. Rubin? Good. Well, with that, I would once again thank you very much. And the story is very moving and very touching. And we're very thankful that you were able to make it out of that place. Yes. I don't have the sound part, but the safe is.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Good. Okay, well, thank you very much. That was a very good presentation. Mr. Rubens will be here if you have any detailed questions. And now, without further ado, before we have some refreshments back there, last chance for 50-50, and we'll have a drawing. This is all coupons, right? Mr. Rubens, would you do us the pleasure of reaching over here and unseen?
The number is 834 742. 834 742.
Somebody's got to have it.
Have you got your pockets on?
No, I get.
Maybe I have it.
Yeah, maybe you have it. Do you have it?
Yeah, I have it in my hands. Okay, don't be shy.
This gentleman right here. What's the total? Okay, well, here's $30 whole. Don't spend it all in one place. Stay away from the casino. There you are. So, without further ado, please remember our November meeting. And you want to take another coupon? I believe it's this one. Okay. Without further ado, please remember the meeting in November, and bring your flags, and that's going to be a very interesting ceremony. So if there are no other questions, no other stuff to do, see you next month. There's some some water and donuts and, or rather cupcakes and stuff in the back.
There are so many fishes in the sea that swim around in perfect harmony. There are some sharks, and they are pretty bad. So dolphins come and kick them in the head. So if you are a mammal or a fish, you may end up somewhere on someone's dish. To be a fish that can be rough, even though you play it tough, there are so many fishes in the sea. There are so many fishes in the sea. There goes a yellow thing so preciously. A sergeant major with the stripes and all, eating from a yellow-colored wall. Stiletto fish are poised for an attack. Suddenly they'll grab you in the neck. Life is like the sea around you. You need all your wits about you to swim with all the fishes in the sea. To swim with all the fishes in the sea. To swim with all the fishes. Swim with all the fishes. To swim with all the fishes in the sea.